A starving widow and her children saved the dying cattle baron buried in the snow. The boot was what I remember first. Not the cold, not the dark pressing down so heavy it'd weight, not even the pain, and God knows there was enough of it. The boot. My right one. Gone. Somewhere between the ridge and wherever I'd ended up, the lace had worked loose and the boot had come off, and I remember staring at my own foot, wool sock stiff with ice, the toe of it black already, and thinking, that's the thing that kills me. Not a bullet, not the fall, not the 3 men who'd left me for dead in the draw. A boot. 41 years running cattle on the high range, and a boot. I'd built an empire out of that country. Not the kind of empire they write about in dime novels, with a big white house and servants ringing bells. The kind you build with your back and your hands in 17-hour days until your knuckles don't fully straighten anymore and you go to sleep smelling like cow and you don't mind because it's yours. 3,000 head at peak. 60 miles of fence I'd strung myself before I could afford to hire men to do it. The Dunbar name meant something in Crail County. It meant, don't test him, he won't bend. And then Gerald Yount came. I won't give him more words than he deserves, so I'll say it plain. He came in as a business partner, left with the deed to 40% of my land through a contract written by a lawyer I'd trusted since my father's time, and when I went to contest it, the judge in Harlan had already been to supper twice at Yount's house. 3 years of bleeding, 3 years of watching acreage peel away, of herds mysteriously getting foot rot or going missing over contested boundary lines, of hands quitting because their wages came late. I kept fighting. A man like me doesn't know how to do anything else. The 3 riders Yount sent that January weren't there to kill me. Just to warn me, they said. 2 of them held my arms and 1 of them worked my ribs, and when I went down the slope in the dark, I don't know if I slipped or if 1 of them helped me along. Didn't matter much either way. The draw filled with 6 inches of snow most nights, and I was in it without a boot in January, and that was that. I didn't pray. I want to say I did, because it might make me sound like a better man. I just lay there with my cheek against the snow and waited to stop. I heard the boy before I saw him. A small voice talking to something, counting. I couldn't parse the words, my ears had gone strange, sounds coming from too far away like hearing through a wall. Then a shape against the gray sky. Small. 8, maybe 9 years old, in a coat 2 sizes too big, leading a mule the color of old iron. The mule was what he was counting, talking to the mule, telling it to move. He stopped when he saw me. He didn't yell, didn't run. He stood there and looked at me the way a boy does when he's been raised in country that teaches you quick, danger first, feelings after. He looked at my foot. He looked at the blood on the snow. Then he tied the mule to a scrub oak and came down the slope on his heels, careful, and he put 2 fingers against my neck the way you'd check a steer. "Mister," he said, "you're alive." I didn't have anything to say to that. He was gone for what felt like an hour. Might have been 20 minutes. I'd stopped tracking time the way you do when the cold goes all the way through. When he came back, he had a woman with him and a piece of canvas and a length of rope. I don't know what I expected, not her. She was maybe 34, 35. Hard to say, hard country ages a person, and she'd clearly had her share. Dark hair, face like a hatchet blade, not pretty in any soft sense of the word, but striking in the way a well-made tool is striking. She wore a man's coat, her husband's, I'd learn later, and she came down the slope like she'd been navigating draws all her life, which she had. She crouched over me, and she looked at my foot, and she looked at my face, and she said, not unkindly, "Who did this to you?" Not a question, an observation about the kind of thing that doesn't happen by accident. I told her it didn't matter. She said, "It matters to me." And she stood up and looked at her boy and said, "Get the other end of the canvas, Ramai." They dragged me on that canvas up the slope and onto the back of the mule, and I passed out somewhere in the middle of it and didn't wake up until I was inside. The house was 1 room, maybe 18 by 20, with a low ceiling and a stone chimney that drew poorly and a puncheon floor with a gap between two boards you could drop a coin through. There was a rope bed against the far wall, a table, 2 stools, a shelf with a tin of flour, a smaller tin of salt, and a Bible so worn the cover was separate from the pages. The fire was built from a stack of wood so small I could see the count of it without trying 3 days of wood if they were careful. Maybe 4. There were 2 children, the boy, Remai, and a girl of about 5, sitting on a blanket near the fire with her knees pulled up to her chest, watching me come in through eyes that looked too big for her face. The way a child looks when they've been hungry long enough. The woman, her name was Clara Marsh, pulled off my sock and my stomach turned at the foot underneath it. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she went to the hearth and came back with a cloth she'd warmed, and she worked on it, and she didn't flinch, and she didn't say anything comforting that would have been a lie. I said, "I've got men on the ranch, they'll send." "They won't," she said, "not cruel, just certain. Yount's people have been through, your hands are gone, 2 of them left county." I'd known it. Somewhere underneath, the not knowing I'd known it. She pressed the warm cloth around the toes and I made a sound I'm not proud of and she said, without looking up, "You can make that sound. Go ahead." Which was the strangest piece of mercy anyone ever showed me, and I felt it more than I wanted to. They gave me the rope bed. I told her that was wrong, with the children on the floor. She said the children had bedded on the floor half the winter already and one more night wouldn't harm them, and the tone of it didn't leave room for argument. I lay there in the dark, listening to the children breathe, listening to the fire die down. Clara sat on a stool by the hearth long after the children slept, doing something with her hands I couldn't see in the dark. Mending, maybe, or just sitting. At some point she said, quietly, not to me exactly, "Harold died in October, fever, 4 days and he was gone." I didn't say I was sorry. She wasn't the kind of woman who wanted that. She said, "We've got about a week of food, maybe 10 days if I stretch it. Remai's been running trap lines but the snow killed the rabbit. I've been thinking about the mule." A pause, the fire settled. "I won't eat the mule," she said. "He's ours and he's worked and that's not how we treat what works for us." I understood that. In my marrow I understood it. "I'll get you food," I said. She turned and looked at me in the dark. I couldn't see her expression. "You can't walk," she said. "I know, but I will." She turned back to the fire. After a while she said, "Go to sleep, Mr. Dunbar, Cole Dunbar." A silence. "I know that name," she said. The foot didn't take. That was the fear those first days. She watched the toes and I watched her watching them, and the color stayed wrong. The ring toe and the little toe went dark and stayed dark, and by the 3rd morning she told me plain. 2 toes, she said, maybe 3 depending on how it goes. "You done this before." Harold had a hand go bad after a fence post came down on it. Same work. She had a straight razor that she'd kept stropped. She had whiskey, very little of it, and she used it well and not a drop on me until the moment called for it. I'm not going to describe what she did those 2 mornings in detail. What I'll say is she was steady. Steadier than men I'd paid to be steady. She didn't make me feel diminished by it. She moved through it like work that needed doing, and when it was done she washed her hands in the basin and she said, "That's the worst of it gone. Your foot will work, might have a limp, probably will." I said, "I've been limping 40 years, just not on the outside." She gave me a look I couldn't read. Not a smile, not quite. Something in her eyes that said she'd heard a truth in there. The fever came that night. 3 days of it. I don't have clean memory of those 3 days. Fragments. The girl Maddie, the 5-year-old, sitting at the foot of the bed with her blanket, watching me with those big solemn eyes. Remai bringing water and not spilling it, which is a harder task than it sounds when you're carrying a full cup across uneven floorboards in the dark, and the person in the bed is shaking so hard the whole frame rattles. Clara's hand on my forehead, checking, not lingering, just checking. The same way she checked the toes. Clinical and steady and not without care, but not drowning in care either. She was built for it, I think. For emergency. A lot of people are built for ordinary time but fall apart in emergency. She was the other kind. At some point in the deepest part of the fever, I said something. I don't know what, and she said, clearly, near my ear, "You're not done yet, Cole Dunbar. I didn't haul you up that slope so you could quit on me in my own bed." I came back. I lay there afterward feeling like a wet rag wrung out, and she brought me a tin cup of broth. Rabbit, finally. Ramai had gotten 2 in the traps, and she sat on the stool and she watched me drink it and she said, "There. Just that there." The days had a shape to them I hadn't expected. I'd spent my life on a schedule built around cattle, up before the sun, work until the dark, sleep hard and do it again. Here, in this one room, the shape was different and it took me a while to read it. Clara woke before the children. That was first. I'd hear her at the hearth in the near dark, the sound of her working the coals back, the small knock of wood being placed. She moved quietly but not carefully, the way a person moves when they've been up first long enough that silence isn't a performance anymore, just a habit. Then the children, Maddie first usually, she was a morning child, got up easy, no argument with the day. Ramai took longer, but he never needed to be called twice. Clara didn't call twice. That much was clear. They ate what there was, and what there was not much, and they ate it without comment. I noticed Clara's portions. She was short counting herself, had been the whole time, and she was doing it in a way designed not to be noticed, always the last to serve herself, always finding some reason her bowl was smaller. I noticed on the 4th day and I didn't say anything, which was the right call. Saying something would have embarrassed her, and embarrassing Clara Marsh was not a thing I was willing to do. On the 5th morning, I pushed half my bowl toward Maddie. Not dramatically, just moved it over while she was looking at the fire. She looked at it, looked at me. I said, "I can't finish it." That was a lie, and she was 5 years old, and she knew it was a lie. But she also knew that some lies are given to let a person keep their dignity. She'd been raised by Clara Marsh. She pulled the bowl over and ate it without another word. Clara across the room didn't look up from what she was doing, but I saw her hand stop for a moment, just a moment, and then go on. The ranch, my ranch, or what had been my ranch, was visible in the distance on clear days, the main barn roof catching what little winter sun there was. From where I stood it looked intact, but I knew better, knew what Yount would have done with it methodically, piece by piece, the way he did everything. Ramai came and stood beside me. He was a quiet boy, not shy but contained, like he'd learned to take up only his share of the air. He said without preamble, "Mama said you were the biggest rancher in the county." "Was?" I said. He thought about that. "What happened?" "A man cheated me." He nodded like that was a complete explanation, because in his world it was. "You gonna get it back?" he said. I looked at the distant barn. My hands were on the door frame. The skin over the knuckles was loose now, the way it gets when you've lost weight fast, and I could see the bones underneath. "Yeah," I said, "I am." Ramai went back to his chores. He didn't say anything more about it. He didn't need to. The thing about Clara Marsh was she didn't offer comfort and she didn't withhold it either. She was just present in a way that was neither intrusive nor distant, and I'd never known anybody quite like that. Most people, you can feel them wanting something back when they give you their time. A thank you, some acknowledgement, even just to feel needed. Clara just went about the work. The house, the children, the traps, the mule. She did it without ceremony and without complaint, and without performing the lack of complaint, which is a harder thing than most people manage. I started being useful around the 12th day. Small things first, seated work. Mending harness leather she'd brought in, of which there was a good pile, old equipment that should have been addressed in the fall and hadn't been, because a woman alone with 2 children in the early winter doesn't always get to the harness leather. I have good hands for leather. Always have. My father taught me, and I'd kept it up even when I had men to do it, because there are some things you don't let go of. Ramai watched me the first day. Sat 3 feet away on the floor with his knees up, not saying anything, just watching. I didn't perform. I just worked, the way my father had taught me. Pull the stitch tight but not mean. Let the needle find the hole rather than forcing it. Feel for the spots where the leather wants to crack before it actually cracks. After a while, Ramai said, "Can I try?" I handed him the awl and the piece I was working. He took it carefully, both hands, like something that mattered. He was too aggressive at first, fighting the leather. I said, "Don't argue with it. It knows where it wants to go. You're just helping it along." He didn't say anything, but I saw him adjust. A kid who can adjust without being told twice is a particular kind of kid. He got a clean stitch in after 4 or 5 tries. He looked at it. "Is that right?" he said. "Close enough," I said. "Next one will be better." It was. She came in once and saw me working, and she stopped in the doorway. I said, "Half of this is cracked through. Should have been done in September." She said, "I know that." "I'm not criticizing," I said. "I'm saying it's done now." She looked at the pile I'd finished. She picked up a length of it and ran her thumb along the repaired seam. She set it back down and she went to the hearth without saying anything. After supper that night she said, "Harold was a good man. He wasn't a man who was easy in himself. Things weighed on him." A pause. "He took the fever like he'd been waiting for a reason to stop fighting." I didn't say anything to that either. I just let it be there. She said, "You're different." "I'm older," I said. "No," she said. "That's not it." I didn't ask her what she meant. I thought I knew, and I wasn't ready to hear it said out loud. Ramai was the one who brought me the news, actually. He'd walked into Crail, 4 miles each way, in the snow, without being asked, because he'd heard from a neighbor boy that there was talk about the Dunbar Ranch. He came back with his cheeks red and his boots soaked through, and he stood by the fire and he said, "Yount's lawyer is in Harlan, filed something with the court. They're saying you abandoned the property." I was standing by then, moving well enough, the bandaged foot in a boot Clara had stuffed with rags to fit. I felt something go cold in me that had nothing to do with the temperature. "When's the hearing?" I said. "Ramai," Clara said before he could answer, "go see to the mule." He went. She looked at me. "You're not going to Harlan in the condition you're in," she said. "I'm going to Harlan." "You'll fall over in the street." "Then I'll fall over, but I'll fall over in the courthouse." She looked at me for a long time, long enough that I started to feel the judgment in it and straightened a little without meaning to. She said, "There's a man named Forsyth in Crail, lawyer. He's not in Yount's pocket as far as I know. Harold used him for the deed on this place." I said, "Forsyth, Eli Forsyth." "You know him." "I used to before all this." I paused. "He may not want to be seen near me." "He may not," she said, "but he should be asked." There was something in the way she said it. Not "go and do this," not an order. More like, "A good man asks," as if she already knew I was a good man and was just reminding me of it. I'd had people manage me before, foremen, lawyers, the judge's clerk. Nobody had ever managed me like that, like they were simply reflecting something back. I said, "I need to ask you for the mule." She said, "I know. I don't know when I can bring it back." "I know that too." A long silence. "Clara," I said. She looked at me. I said, "If this goes sideways, if Yount's already got it locked in the court, I want you to know." I stopped. I hadn't practiced this and I wasn't good at it, and the words were coming out in the wrong order. She said, "You want me to know you'll find a way to see us kept?" "Yes." She looked at the fire. "I didn't pull you out of that snow for a debt, Cole." "I know." "Then stop talking about it like a business arrangement." I didn't say anything else, but I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as it went quiet. The way a thing goes quiet when it finds its right place. That night, the night before I rode to Crail, I couldn't sleep. Not anxiety, exactly. More like the particular alertness you get when something's been decided and your body knows it and wants to be ready. I lay on the floor. I'd given up the bed once I could move without help. That fight I'd won, and I listened to the house. Clara was still awake. I could tell by the quality of the silence. When people are asleep, there's a different kind of quiet. She was sitting still, which was unusual for her, and I had the sense she was thinking. After a while she said, quietly, not looking at me, "Cole." "Yeah." "When you get it back," a pause, "what do you do with it?" I thought about that. Before all of this, I'd have said I build it back to what it was. Get the herd back to 3,000. Hire the men, string the fence. Get back to the Dunbar name meaning what it used to mean. But that wasn't what she was asking. I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Honest answer." "I used to know," I said. "I had a wife. She died 11 years ago. After that it was what I had left to care about. I just kept building it because the building was the thing to do." And now, I looked at the ceiling. The boards were irregular, gaps patched with newspaper and dried mud. Someone had done it themselves, in the way you do when you're getting through, not when you're building to last. "Now I've got a reason beyond the building," I said. She didn't say anything. I said, "I know this is not the right time to say this, and I know I'm a man who came in off your floor half dead and you don't owe me anything and I'm not asking for anything. But you should know that when I get back, when this is settled, I would like to ask you something, if you'd be willing to hear it." A very long silence. "Ask me then," she said, "when it's settled." That was all. She went to her side of the room and I heard her lie down, and after a while the silence changed and she slept. I lay there with the fire going down and the cold coming through the walls, and I felt something I hadn't felt since my wife died. It's hard to name. It's not excitement. Excitement is a young man's thing. It was more like purpose, like the ground under the building was solid again. I slept better than I had since the draw. Eli Forsyth was in his office above the dry goods store, which was exactly where he'd been for 20 years, and he looked up when I came through the door with the wet and the cold coming off me, and he said, after a long beat, "I heard you were dead." "Not yet," I said. He looked me over, the bandaged foot, the weight off my face. He said, "Sit down, Cole." I sat. He listened. He was a good listener, one of those men who doesn't fill the quiet because he's learned that the quiet is when the truth comes out. I told him everything. The contract, the judge, the 3 riders, the draw. He took notes in a hand so small I couldn't read it from across the desk. When I finished, he sat there for a minute. He said, "The abandonment filing is shaky. They'd need you to be gone for a clear year and not in contact with anyone in the county who could testify otherwise. You've been in the county." "I've been in a widow's house 4 miles from town." He nodded. "That's in the county." He tapped the desk. "What I need is a record of your presence. Sworn statement from Clara Marsh. Date you arrived, the circumstances. And anything physical, the injury, a doctor's examination." "Doc Plant's in Yount's corner." "Doc Plant is," Forsyth said. "His assistant Keller's a different matter." We looked at each other across the desk. He said, "I won't lie to you, Cole. Yount's got influence. This isn't going to be clean." "It never was clean," I said. "I just want it fair." He nodded. "Give me 2 weeks." I came back to Clara's house that evening with the mule in the small dark, the cold having come back down hard off the mountains, and the light through the gap under the door was the most welcome thing I'd seen in a long time. She had supper on. Beans with a bone in them. Ramai had gotten a rabbit large enough that there was enough to fill everyone's bowl and have something left, which was a change from the previous days, and the children ate with the focused quiet of children who'd learned not to take a full bowl for granted. I sat at the table and Maddie, the 5-year-old, climbed up on the stool next to mine without being invited and looked at my plate and looked at her own plate, and without any preamble reached over and put a piece of her cornbread on my plate. I looked at Clara. Clara was looking at Maddie. Something in her face I hadn't seen before, not sentimentality, not quite, more like recognition. I said to Maddie, "I've got plenty." Maddie said, "You're big." I ate the cornbread. After the children were down, Clara and I sat by the fire. She'd mended a pair of remise trousers twice already this winter, and the patch on the knee was now thicker than the trouser itself. Her hands never stopped. I'd been watching those hands for 2 weeks, and I didn't think they knew how to be still. I told her what Forsyth had said. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. When I was done, she said, "I'll give the statement. Clara, if Yount hears that a widow is standing up for me in court." "I know what Yount can do," she said. "I've been watching what Yount does to people for 3 years. He drove Harold off the north pasture he'd been grazing since his father's time, said it was encroachment." She looked at the fire. "Harold didn't fight back. He wasn't made for fighting." She looked at me. "You are." I said, "I don't want you in the line of it." She said, "Cole, look around." I looked. The one room, the low ceiling, the tin of flour, the wood stacked 3 days deep. "I'm already in the line of it," she said. "Every person in this county who's not Gerald Yount or paid by Gerald Yount is in the line of it. I'd rather be in the line of it standing up." I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "You're not afraid of much." She considered that. "I'm afraid of plenty. I'm afraid of one of my children getting a fever. I'm afraid of the flour running out before spring. I'm afraid of that mule going lame because I can't afford another one." She looked down at the mending. "I'm not afraid of Gerald Yount. He's just a man." "He's a man with a judge," I said. "So far," she said. The hearing was in February, on a Tuesday, the kind of cold morning when the sky is white from edge to edge, and the snow makes no sound under your boot because it's frozen so hard it doesn't compact. Forsyth had done his work. Keller had done the examination and sworn to the injuries and the date he'd first been asked to look at my foot. Clara had given her statement, date of discovery, state of my person, the weeks of care. Ramai had given a statement too, because he'd been the one who found me, and Forsyth said a boy's testimony was often the cleanest because boys didn't know how to dissemble. Yount's lawyer was a man from the city, very clean, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been in a room where it might fail him. He looked at me across the courtroom the way you look at something you've already disposed of and are puzzled to see still moving. I'd worn the best I had, which wasn't much. Clara had brushed the coat and found a shirt that had been Harold's and fit me close enough. I'd shaved with the straight razor, the same one she'd used on the foot. I stood straight. That was all I had to offer, and I offered all of it. The judge was not the Harlan judge. Forsyth had managed a change of venue argument I didn't fully follow, something about conflict of interest. And the judge was a man from Bethel County named Crew, who was old and dry and looked like he'd heard every variation of every lie and was tired of all of them equally. Yount's lawyer made his case. Abandonment, he said. Willful abdication of property rights. He used the word abdication twice, which was one of those words designed to make you feel like something you hadn't done. Then Forsyth stood up. He didn't make a speech. He put Keller on the stand and let him describe what he'd found, which was a man who'd been beaten, who'd lost parts of 2 toes to frostbite, who'd been found dying in a snow-field draw a mile from the property in question. He put Clara on the stand, and she answered every question in a voice that didn't waver and didn't perform, just plain and clear, the way she did everything. Yount's lawyer tried to make something of the fact that I'd been sheltered in her home. He said in a voice that was very careful, "Mrs. Marsh, you have no connection to Mr. Dunbar prior to this incident, is that correct?" "That's correct," she said. And yet you took him in and provided care for several weeks. Yes. May I ask why? Clara looked at the lawyer. She looked at him the way she'd looked at my foot that first morning, assessing, practical, with no judgment that wasn't called for. She said he was alive and needed help. That's generally enough reason. Judge Crew wrote something down. The lawyer said, "You stand to benefit from Mr. Dunbar's recovery of his property, financially, potentially." Clara said, "I've been offered nothing and I've asked for nothing. You can ask Mr. Dunbar and Mr. Forsyth both." He pushed a little more. She answered plainly every time without heat. After the fourth try, Judge Crew said, "Counselor, the witness has answered this question in 4 different forms. Move on." It took the judge 3 days to render a decision. Forsyth said that was a good sign. A fast decision would have meant it was already decided. The abandonment claim was dismissed. The original contract, the one that had given Yount 40%, Crew said was outside the scope of this proceeding, which was both true and a blow. But the land was mine. The deed stood. The ranch was not Gerald Yount's. Not yet. But not yet can be enough sometimes. Not yet can be a door that's still got hinges on it. I stood outside the courthouse in the white cold and Forsyth shook my hand and said, "That's round 1. We've got a harder road on the contract." I said, "I know. You've got a ranch to rebuild, empty, no hands probably stripped." "I know." He looked at me. "You sound calmer than I expected." I thought about that. "I know what I've got," I said. He nodded, not knowing what I meant. It didn't matter. I stood on the courthouse steps for a while after Forsyth went back inside. The town moved around me, a wagon, 2 men crossing the street, a woman with a basket. None of them knew what had just happened in that room. The world doesn't stop and take note of the moments that matter to you. You get a minute to stand on the steps and feel it, and then you walk down and the day goes on. I felt it. I let myself feel it. The cold air in my lungs, the stiffness in the bandaged foot, the weight of my own hands at my sides, hands that had built something once and had the rough to prove it and would do it again. There wasn't pride exactly, something quieter than pride, more like recognition. I was still here and what was mine was still mine and I was still capable of fighting for it. Then I looked across the square and saw Clara. Ramai was standing beside her. He'd come for the hearing, insisted on it, said a boy ought to see how things worked. I'd argued with him about it, and Clara had not argued with him about it, which was how it was settled. I walked over. The mule turned his head and gave me the look mules give you, which is not an affectionate look, but it's not nothing. Clara turned around. I said, "Done for now." She looked at my face and she read whatever was in it. "Good," she said. Ramai said, "Did we win?" Clara said, "Yes." He thought about that. He was the kind of boy who needed to understand a thing, not just be told it. Does that mean everything's fixed? It means we're in a better position than we were this morning, I said. He processed that. Okay. He went around to hold the mule's head while his mother mounted. Clara put her foot in the stirrup and I held the mule's near side out of habit, the way you do for a person, and she paused with her hand on the saddle and she looked down at me. She said, "Come for supper tonight." I looked up at her. She said, "You've been sleeping in Forsyth's storage room for 3 days. You smell like a storage room. Come for supper and then stay if you want, and tomorrow we can think about what comes next. Together." It was the word together that did it. Not as a romantic word, not dressed up. Just together, like it was the obvious practical thing. 2 people who'd been through something deciding to face the next thing from the same direction. I said, "Clara." She waited. I said, "I've got a long road to get back what I had. Longer to build it past that. I don't know how it comes out." "Nobody does," she said. "I'm not a young man." "I didn't ask for a young man," she said. She held my eyes for a moment, and it wasn't a soft look. wasn't the look of a woman flattering a man. It was the look of a woman who had measured a thing carefully over a long time and arrived at a number she trusted. Then she nudged the mule forward, and Ramai fell in alongside, and I stood in the cold courthouse square and watched them go. I stood there until they rounded the corner. Then I went to get my horse. I won't draw this out to the parts that came slowly, because the slow parts are their own story, and this is what I'm telling. The short of it is, I moved back onto the ranch in March, into the main house that Yount's people had stripped down to the studs near about but had left structurally standing, because a building is harder to get rid of than furniture. I had $400 for Scythe had found it, somehow, I never fully understood from where, and a note from the Crail Bank for more, signed by a man named Beaumont who'd had his own trouble with Yount, and for that reason was inclined to see me standing. The first week back I didn't hire anyone, just myself, walking the property. 4 days of walking, as much as the foot allowed, which was more each day, taking inventory in my head. What they'd taken, the good tools, the leather tack, most of the working equipment, 2 mares and a breeding stallion I'd paid considerable money for. What they'd left, the structure of the buildings, the fences, the water, the land itself. The land was the thing. You can replace tools. You can't replace the ground under your feet. I found a calf on the 3rd day in the north draw. Thin, probably dropped too early but alive. Standing in the draw like it was waiting for someone to come find it. I stood there looking at it for a while. I went back to the barn and found enough old rope to make a lead. Brought the calf in. Fed it with my hand for 3 days before it would eat on its own. That calf was the start. I hired 3 hands that first spring, which was all I could afford. One of them was Lester Crane, who'd worked for me before, who'd left not because he'd wanted to, but because Yount's people had made it clear that staying would cost him. He came back without being asked. Just rode up one morning and said, "I heard you were back." That was all. Clara and the children were 4 miles away the whole time. I rode over on Sundays when I could, and on some Wednesdays when the work permitted it. Ramai started coming over on his own, just showing up, the way boys do when they've decided something. He'd work alongside me and Crane without being asked, picking up what he could watch. He had a good eye for cattle, which you either have or you don't. One evening in April, with the light going long and the snow mostly gone and the first real warmth coming through on the breeze, Clara and I sat on the porch of the main house. I'd gotten the porch boards replaced. That was one of the early things. And the children were inside, and the mountains were going pink, and she said, without looking at me, "You asked me last winter what I got out of this." "I didn't ask that," I said. "You meant to ask it," she said. "You were too proud." I let that sit. "What I got," she said, "was a reason." She looked at the mountains. "You get through a winter like that one and you need a reason to do the next one. Harold was a good man, but he wasn't a reason. He was she paused. He was a companion, and companionship runs out." She looked at me. "A reason doesn't." I said, "I'm a reason." "You are," she said, simply, like it had been settled and she was just confirming the record. I reached over and put my hand over hers on the porch rail. My hand was still the big rough hand it had always been, knuckles that didn't straighten, the skin of a man who'd worked. She didn't pull away from it. She turned her hand over and closed it around mine, and we sat like that while the mountains went from pink to gray. I don't have a better word for what I felt than whole. Not healed. I don't think men like me heal exactly. We just figure out how to carry the weight better. Not young. Not like the past was erased. Just whole, like the pieces were in the right place. The contract case dragged 2 more years. I won most of it back. Not everything. There's still 15,000 acres on the east side that Yount eventually sold to a mining concern, and that's likely gone for good. But the core ranch, the home range, the land my father put the first post in, that's mine. That's Dunbar land. Yount left the county in the end. Not dramatically, not in handcuffs. He just left. The way men do when the thing they've built starts to crumble at the base. Last I heard he was in Denver in some different kind of scheme. Not my concern anymore. Ramai works for me now. Has since he turned 17. He's 23 this year, knows the range better than men twice his age, and there isn't a hand on the place who doesn't respect him. He's got his father's quietness, but he doesn't have Harold's weight. He carries himself like someone who's going to be fine. Maddie is 16. She looks like her mother. She has her mother's eyes, that measuring quality, that thing that sees you before you know you're being seen. She'll be a woman who knows her own mind and doesn't apologize for it, and the man she eventually chooses will either be worth that or he won't last long. Clara and I were married in June of that year, the good June, the one where the rains came right and the grass came in tall. There wasn't a big ceremony. We didn't need one. We stood in front of Pastor Henry's with the children and two of my hands in Forsyth, and we said the words, and that was that. She wore a blue dress she'd made herself, and she looked at me the whole time we said the words, not past me, not at her hands. At me. I've thought about that look many times since. When the work is hard and the weather's against us and the price of beef has gone soft and the fence needs another mile of work. I think about that look, and it steadies something in me that used to shake. I came out of that draw missing 2 toes and owing everything I still had to a woman who had nothing and gave it anyway. Not because I was important. Not because of the Dunbar name or the 3,000 head or the 60 miles of fence. Because I was alive, and alive was reason enough. She saw that in me before I saw it in myself. What I was worth when I had nothing to show for it. I don't know how a man repays that. You don't, I think, you just carry it. You live in a way that's worth the carrying. I'm sitting on the porch now. It's evening, the same kind of evening it always is out here when the day's been good, the mountains holding the last of the light, the stock settled, the house behind me giving off the smell of supper and wood smoke and people who have made something together. Clara comes out and stands beside me. She puts her hand on my shoulder, not hard, just rests it there, the way you do when you're home and you know it. Down past the fence line, Ramai is coming in from the north pasture on the gray horse. He'll have the count in his head, he always does. He'll tell me over supper the way he does, straight and plain. 53 head north of the creek, 2 more came through the fence. We'll fix it tomorrow. We always do. The light's going now. The mountains are going gray. Clara doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. She just stands there with her hand on my shoulder, and we watch the boy come in, and the stock settle, and the last light hold a moment longer than you think it will, and then let go. That's what I've got. That's what I came back for.